So the types of markets, there's lots of markets, right? A market is just an exchange, a market exchange of goods and services. So the types of markets in the overall financial market, you got commodity markets, you got money markets, you got derivatives markets, you got futures markets, you got foreign exchange markets, you got capital markets, stocks and bonds, cryptocurrency market, foreign exchange, spot market. You got 2 days to make a deal on a spot market. Deliver the cash or commodity or the deal's off. You got interbank lending market. Now, those are all the markets in the financial market. Jerome Powell's the one that's in charge of all these financial markets. He's the chair. He's the chair of the Federal Reserve. He's also the chair of the Open Market Committee, the thing that does monetary policy, too. So, the Federal Open Market Committee. So, Jerome Powell's very powerful, been the federal chair for 2 years, but guess this is what Jerome Powell recently said in January 29th, 2020. He said, and when we've reached that level, when it's crashing, we'll begin to gradually reduce our asset purchases to the level of the underlying trend growth of demand for our liabilities. For the level of the underlying trend growth of demand for our liabilities. Is he kidding? Jerome Powell doesn't seem to understand that the supply of money is attached to the economic growth rate. The supply of money is a function of the economic growth rate. And we need wages. Wages is, so Jerome Powell, what's he think? What's Jerome Powell thinking? That the supply of money needs to be attached to the demand for money? Is that what he thinks? So the demand for money should dictate the supply of money. So who all wants some more money, right? Jerome Powell said, who all wants some more money? Everybody. Okay, so just print up 500 trillion, bazillion more of those fucking green pieces of paper. Who cares if we're even talking about bazillions of dollars? There's free-floating fiat Federal Reserve notes, those worthless continentals. For everybody, quantitative easing devalues the dollar, causes inflation. It is terrible. Hey, Jerome Powell, when you going to start printing up those new Harriet Tubmans? When calling a $20 bill a Tubman be cool as fuck? Hey, Jerome Powell, start printing up those Tubmans and tie the money supply to the economic growth rate, not the demand for money, you stupid. That's not how supply and demand works. God, you stupid, dumbass, you stupid-ass, dumb motherfucker. Jesus Christ, Jerome Powell, get your shit together. Examples of money market instruments are treasury bills, commercial paper, bankers' acceptances, deposits, certificates of deposit, bills of exchange, repurchase agreements, federal funds, short-lived mortgage and asset-based securities. Money markets, which provide liquidity for the global financial system, include for capital markets. They're also part of the global financial market. Now, bankers' acceptances, this is a money market instrument representing a promised future payment by a bank. The payment is accepted and guaranteed by the bank as a time draft to be drawn on a deposit. So deposit the money and they'll give you a loan for that deposit. The draft specifies the amount of funds, the date of the payment, and the entity to which the payment is owed. Repurchase agreements, this is repo. This is also another money market instrument. It's a form of short-term borrowing for dealers and government securities. In case of a repurchase agreement, the dealer sells government securities to investors, usually on an overnight basis, and then they buy them back the following day at a slightly higher price. They repurchase them. They buy them back. So, who gives a shit, right? This is all about Milton Friedman, an economist. So who is Milton Friedman? Basically, when I think about economics, you got your right-wing economist, you got your left-wing economist. Milton Friedman is a right-wing economist. And in some respects, I don't have a good left. I've been looking into Karl Marx, for beginners. So I'm going to get an amalgamation of Karl Marx and Milton Friedman and just develop my own independent, economic philosophy, economic theory. Maybe John Maynard Keynes, but Milton Friedman is just a fucking badass. He's an American economist, 1976 Nobel Memorial Prize. He won, a Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for his research on consumption analysis, monetary history, and theory, and the complexity of the stabilization policy. He was with George Stigler. Milton Friedman was among the intellectual leaders of the Chicago School of Economics, Neoclassical University of Chicago. They rejected Keynesianism in favor of monetarism. That's what his philosophy is known as, monetarism, which is all about, the Federal Reserve and the money supply until the mid-1970s. And then that's when the University of Chicago turned to new classical macroeconomics, heavily based on the concept of rational expectations. So Milton Friedman is Ronald Reagan's economic advisor. When Reagan said the government is the problem, Milton Friedman agrees. Milton Friedman believed in the wonderful, magical free market economic system with as little government intervention as possible. The free markets, they always work. And actually, free markets are the only thing that work for Milton Friedman. So these lead economists were all educated by Milton Friedman, Gary Becker, who also won a Nobel Prize, Robert Fogel, Thomas Sowell, Robert Lucas Jr. Freedom and Capitalism and Free to Choose are two of Milton Friedman's books. He's wrote 300 articles for Newsweek. Now, Milton Friedman theorized that there existed a natural rate of unemployment and argued that unemployment below this rate would cause inflation to accelerate. Milton Friedman argued that the Phillips curve was in the long run vertical at the natural rate and predicted what would come to be known as stagflation. He wanted very little government. Milton Friedman's belief is called monetarism. He believed that a steady, small expansion of money supply was the preferred policy. Milton Friedman hated the Fed, but since it exists in a central bank policy aimed at keeping the growth of the money supply at a rate commensurate with the growth in productivity and demand for goods. So it's not just the population, it's about the growth of in productivity and the demand of goods. You got to keep the money supply up with the economy, with all that is necessary in an economy. So you got to replace old and damaged bills, and you got to steady, small expansion of the money supply is what you need. You just for it to dribble out, just drip, just a drip, just a tiny little drip. Fucking $6 trillion ain't no drip. So we're not listening to Milton Friedman right now with the quantitative easing bullshit. Milton Friedman's monetarism influenced the Federal Reserve's response to the 2008 Great Recession. Ben Bernanke actually said thank you to Milton Friedman because he criticized the Fed's involvement in the Great Depression. The Federal Reserve fucked everybody over in the Great Depression. Then we had a Federal Reserve, and the Great Depression happened. How come we still have a Federal Reserve? That's the whole fucking point for the Federal Reserve. 9,000 banks collapsed and, went out of business. So 9,000 banks crashed and burned. Where the fuck was the Fed? They were sitting there raising interest rates, and they weren't passing loans out to anybody. They were actually contracting the money supply. So don't do that. Don't go backwards. But a small, steady drip, just a small expansion of the money supply, that is the best policy. That's what Milton Friedman says, and I agree with him, because just printing up money, you're going to get addicted to that. Free money? Who wants free money? Everybody does. So somebody's got to be the responsible adult in the room and say, knock it off, you fucking kids. You can't just, it's not Scrooge McDuck's money bin. You can't just go to the money bin and grab as much money as you want. Milton Friedman's monetarism influenced the Fed's response in 2008. So hopefully they listened to him, but they did quantitative easing, so how closely could they have listened? Milton Friedman was actually a pretty decent guy when it comes to his viewpoints. He opposed the war on drugs. He opposed the draft. He opposed imperialism. He was in favor of the freely floating exchange rate. He was in favor of a negative income tax. He was in favor of a universal basic income, and he was for school vouchers. So free floating exchange rates, this is where the world's currencies are traded without any government interference. How can you know how much the dollar is worth if you're quantitative easing, if you're printing up money and expanding the money supply and cheating? How can you actually know how much your dollar is worth? Milton Friedman says freedom is free from violence or threats of violence. Persuasion is freedom. That's different than coercion. The freedom for me to move my fist is dictated by the proximity of your chin. So I can move my fist as much as I want, right? So I got as much freedom, whatever floats my boat, but doesn't sink yours. Individuals and family are fundamental units to Milton Friedman. State is an instrument for the individual, not the other way around. The state is a means, but not an end to of itself. So he's the opposite of JFK. Ask not what your country could do for you. Ask what you could do for your country. Milton Friedman says, ask not what you could do for your country. Ask what the fuck can your country do for you. The market needs to be a voluntary association, a voluntary exchange of buying and selling, complete freedom. Government is necessary, Milton Friedman says, for the common defense. He says it's a yes or no question. If we're in a war, then we got to be in a war, unanimously or against it. You can't have half the country fighting a war and the other half not fighting a war. He also mentioned that nobody believes in majority rules and absolute principles. So, the whole thing, tyranny of the majority, watch out for mob rule. Democracy is bad because tyranny of the majority may happen. Nobody believes that majority in democracy is an absolute. It's expedient. And it's also the least worst government out there. So if you're not a democratic government, then holy shit. The other government that Milton Friedman believes is some court system so that corporations, a third party, a non-biased third party, to resolve disputes between corporations. So he believes in some government, for the common defense, for the court system, but he was, pretty much laissez-faire, free market, fundamentalist, free market, just fucking roll the dice. We're in casino-style capitalism, wild, wild west, dog-eat-dog. Use your brain, use your mind, supply and demand. It all comes down to supply and demand. Use your common sense. You can figure it out yourself. So Milton Friedman, in some respects, believed in the rational person. Milton Friedman also believed that the sole primary duty for a business, for a corporation, the primary responsibility was a fiduciary one. They had to make money. They had to profit and make as much fucking money as possible. And then that's how you get a tax, the capitalist tax. The product, the cost of the product is equal to the cost that it took to produce of it. So any money that they add above the cost of production is just profit. They're trying to maximize their profits for them, for their shareholders, make a shit ton of money, for them, keep the company afloat. I'm sure that's part of the maximizing profit thing too. But don't underestimate labor power. Labor goes into the commodity. Labor is a commodity, and it goes into the product that is made. That's the whole labor theory of value. But labor is powerful, and we should talk about labor as labor power because it's basically labor power is your creativity. It's the very essence of who you are as a human being. And that's what the capitalists are stealing from you. So, yeah. Perhaps the socialist could out-capitalist the capitalist. So, yeah, socialist just says, hey, we all care about each other, but in some respects, if we all knew Milton Friedman's economic policies and theories and ideas, at least up to his level, then I think we'd have a much better conversation. Milton Friedman had some sort of charity, the free voucher, the free school voucher. He wanted to, finance basically private schools with the school vouchers. I think school choice is a great fucking idea. School choice. I believe in school choice. And universal basic income. Jesus Christ, talk about fucking revolutionary. But what was I saying? Milton Friedman, for the school vouchers, he had some sort of foundation. He died in 2006. So he had a foundation that's going to, exist, and they took the name Milton Friedman's Foundation. They took his name off, and it's just whatever, the foundation now. Free choice or school choice, I think. It's just called school choice or some shit. But the reason they did that is because Milton Friedman himself said he didn't want, veneration. He didn't really want to be elevated up as a god. He just wanted his ideas to fight for themselves. And in the great pool of ideas, the best ideas should prevail. So he threw out his perspective. And I think he's kind of the Henry Kissinger of economics. When it comes to, who is the best, most reliable person when it comes to especially right-wing conservative economics. I don't know of anybody else. Milton Friedman just stands tall above all the rest. So Milton Friedman is very smart, very intelligent. His Chicago boys apparently helped Chile. Their economy got going, and it is easy just to say, hey, communists, we're all one, we're all in this together, let's look out for one another. But that's not the American way. We've been individualistic, private property, owning our own house, owning our own yard, that kind of stuff. So I wish with Karl Marx, it's too old. His ideas are just too old, and I don't really want a Marxist economist. I just want somebody who, didn't even consider Marx at all. I don't want a person like that, but I want somebody that considered Marx, considered all the theories, update them, and come up with their own perspective. I think Robert Wolff, there's a couple of economists that I'm like, they're not too bad, but there's not too many of them. And, so all I got is Karl Marx and Milton Friedman, but I think that's a badass combination, to be honest with you. Because I'm sure they're fundamentally opposite in a lot of ways, right? One's pure communist and the other one's like a pure capitalist. So, shit. If you can somehow combine their ideas, look at Marx, look at Milton Friedman, and say, I like those ideas, I like these ideas. We all got liberal and conservative in us anyways, so a balanced approach. Why the and somebody made the Robert Wolff or Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff said that it's kind of crazy that you had this big clash of ideas in the 1800s between communism and capitalism, and then the Cold War went on. So during the World War II, both the communists and the capitalists, both Soviet Russia and America, joined together and smashed Nazi Germany. And then right after defeating Nazi Germany with our buddies, Uncle Joe, Stalin, and the Russians, and the Soviet Union, then we were enemies with the Soviet Union for decades afterwards. So that made America very, very paranoid. And it also made them very susceptible to a lot of bullshit domestic oppression. They used the Cold War against Americans, too. So, Marx is kind of crazy. Richard Wolff just says that the whole conversation, you basically got capitalists, and Marx. You got this house, and they have this big family fight, and you got one sibling that said it was awful and terrible, and this other sibling that said it was wonderful and great. And instead of, listening to both of the siblings and saying, okay, which one of you two is, right, or maybe there's something in the middle, or maybe, what the hell happened there. Instead of listening to, both of the siblings, they said when it came to Karl Marx, they was like, nah, we're not even going to listen to you. We're not even going to listen to your perspective. I mean, why, communism still fucks with people today. And this guy wrote about communism 170 years ago. Why are you freaked out about some dead man who wrote about an idea 170 years ago about all of us being, one nation, e pluribus unum, out of many there is one, all for one for all. United we stand, divided we fall. There's a lot of shit that's like that. Stand for, unity and shit. And yet, instead of saying, okay, Marx, come into the conversation, we're like, nope. Karl who? Marx? No, I've never heard of no Karl Marx. Socialism? Communism? No. Oh, yeah, that Russia, when they collapsed. Yeah, Cuba. Yeah. Anyways. So, yeah, that's Milton Friedman. A little bit about Milton Friedman there. 3/21. I'm John Masters, Sunday, April 5th, 2020, Southern Colorado. Peace.